back to Mad Lad William Adams. Like you said, he manages to survive this crazy voyage, and then on top of that, quite miraculously, and despite the fact that the Portuguese Jesuits were egging the authorities on to have him and the entire crew killed, boiled to death, or whatever, he is spared by the feudal lord, who you also mentioned at the beginning, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who luckily for him also becomes shogun not so much after. Now, Ieyasu had a long-lasting relationship with the Jesuits and was trading with the Portuguese, right? He had practical use of them. Still, he didn't want to do them this, at least in their eyes, small favor and kill this dude who was their enemy. Why?
Well, this dude, to convince Ieyasu that he wasn't.
But he couldn't even speak Japanese. I don't get it.
He did it first. The first interview was done in sign language somehow.
Wow.
I suspect that there was a globe. We know that there were globes in Japan at the time. I suspect there was a globe. William Adams had a globe himself. Maybe it was his own globe that he used to demonstrate. But he also somehow used other sign language. And then after a while, a few hours, so they say we don't know the exact details, a Portuguese interpreter was brought in to deal with this. Adams spoke at least 3 languages, possibly 4 or 5, before he arrived in Japan. So he would have been able to communicate with the Portuguese. I'm thinking off the top of my head now, but I think that the Jesuit was called Morejon. I may be wrong on that detail, so we'll just leave it there. But then they carried on the interview for another few hours. The Jesuits were trying to persuade Ieyasu that these new guys were pirates, which again was a quite reasonable thing to do, and from the Jesuit perspective, it was true. They were pirates, and in their boat they had 500 guns, 500 muskets, small guns, and about 30 big guns, cannon. A peaceful ship does not have that many arms, basically.
Well, that's 2 strikes against the dude. Yeah,
it was touch and go, and they would have had good reasons to execute them as pirates. And one of the execution methods was boiling alive. So, again, that's actually great. That's actually fairly accurate. So, yeah, there you go. Anyway, but somehow him that Ieyasu that he's of use. Ieyasu basically brings him under his protection, and then leaves William Adams alone for a year or two. With the rest of his crew. He gives them some money. He gives them a stipend, a very small stipend to live off, just so that they can stay there. They move to what is now Uraga, near Tokyo, and they just kicking their heels. They can't leave without permission, and they can't do anything without Tokugawa's permission. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And after a couple of years, essentially he's won his battles. He's dealt with all the aftermath of his battles. It's called the Battle of Sekigahara. And then Tokugawa calls Adams to court to come and see him. And from there, Adams expands his work for the Tokugawa family, including Tokugawa's son, Hidetada, later on, and starts helping with shipbuilding, helping with knowledge of the outside world, which was considerable in Japan, but was controlled to some extent by the Jesuits, and therefore Adams was bringing in a different form of knowledge and a different, more balanced knowledge. And Adams was tied to nobody. He was shipwrecked. He was on his own. The Jesuits were tied to their own organization, which stretched all the way back to Rome. They had their own politics to deal with. Adams didn't have any of that. The only person he was connected to in that country, far, far away, was Tokugawa Ieyasu and Tokugawa Ieyasu's immediate retainers and underlings. Therefore, he dedicated his life to Tokugawa Ieyasu and became Ieyasu's man. Ieyasu from there promoted him. He could see that this man was dedicated to him, and he promoted him steadily. As Adams became more useful, he was rewarded with land. He was rewarded with riches. He became a lord in Japan. You say he became a samurai. He actually became something more than that. He became a hatamoto, which is a senior samurai rank, with the direct right to request an audience with your lord. Therefore, Adams had the right to request an audience with the shogun eventually, which only a very, very few people had that right. The land that he was given is now just in Yokosuka, which is currently the main Japanese naval base and also the main base of the US fleet in the Pacific as well. So that's an irony of history. That's not entirely, that wasn't intended at the time, of course, but that's where his fief was.
You said at the time trade with Westerners was called the Southern Barbarian Trade. So there was a clear distinction between the Japanese on one hand, and many other places, like you mentioned, practice this as well, all over the world. So Japanese on one hand, and then the smelly barbarians outside. So I wanted to ask, how come Adams' ethnicity, or what we today might call race, was not an issue when it came to his ascendancy through the ranks in society, as strict as the one of feudal Japan? I mean, we're practically talking about nobility here. You said he wasn't just a samurai; he was a senior samurai who had direct access to the ruler of Japan, to Shogun. Was this a special one of a kind type of dispensation, or were these designations more fluid than we might think?
They're more fluid, but it was very rare. There was at least one other person, a Dutchman from the same ship, De Liefde, called Jan Josten van Lodenstein, who was also made Hatamoto of the same rank in very different circumstances. So there's at least one other that was made that. There was, of course, Yasuke, who became a senior retainer to Nobunaga, who was one of Tokugawa's predecessors. And these men were very much, in my view, people that made an effort to fit in, generally. Jan Josten, slightly different perhaps, but that's another story. Adams and Yasuke both tried to fit in with the world around them. They both were fluent in Japanese, or at least were extremely well versed and could communicate very well in Japanese. Adams is recorded as becoming, but the English that came later thought he had become Japanese. He was so Japanese in their eyes. They described him as naturalized Japaner. So we can tell from this that he made himself as unstanding out as possible. So
wearing the same type of clothes, probably the same type of haircut. He had a little sword or whatever. He spoke Japanese.
Definitely.
He was bathing finally.
Yeah, he would have been bathing. Yes, everybody that comes to Japan learns the art of bathing, and they did that in the old days as well as now. That's for another topic. We can talk about that another time. Yeah. Yes, Adams made an effort to fit in. He made an effort to be useful, but also to be seen to be not so different. And I think that's key. This happens everywhere in the world. Again, this is not unique to Japan. People that come from the outside and adapt themselves to their host culture are normally far more successful than those that try to stand out and make themselves difficult or other or separate. The people that fit in, the people that are successful, are almost always those that try their best to fit in. Adams was definitely in that mold.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to Smart Cookies on YouTube. What else is there? Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you really liked what you heard, feel free to become my Patreon. No, my patron on Patreon by going to Patreon and becoming my patron. It's really easy. Just type Smart Cookies Podcast in there. You should be able to find me. Last but not least, I have to thank the absolute legends that are my producers on this show, my existing patrons on Patreon: Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Gordon, Jurechuk, Lorenzo, Mila, Carmen, Taichi, Goran, and Veronica. Without you guys, this show wouldn't exist. So massive thanks. And yeah, see you in the next episode. Bye.